Hello, can you guys hear me all right? Awesome. I should be your fourth speaker. And I'll just put my question in the chat so you guys have it. It's definitely a tongue twister, so it's better to type it.
Do you need any sort of time signals, or are you timing yourself?
Yeah, if it's all right with you, I can just keep time on my phone. And are all my judges ready? Okay, so then just so you guys know, I'm going to be putting my flow pad down here so I can't look at it. Okay. Every time Russian President Vladimir Putin travels internationally for a meeting, his bodyguards bring a poop suitcase with them, so Russian enemies can't take any of Putin's fecal waste. Yeah, this is definitely a stinky approach to foreign policy, but it seems like for the United States, we may not be doing any better, especially when considering that Foreign Policy magazine writes on June 6th of this year that starting at the beginning of this war, the United States aimed to incentivize Russia to end their conflict with Ukraine through sanctions on their economies and exports. But since then, Russia has found financial loopholes where they use third country banks to facilitate other forms of trade with different countries to keep their economy afloat. And now the United States is desperate to take any action to stop this, because it's especially when considering that just 1 hour ago, Russia launched a strike against Ukraine, killing 16 innocent children. It's for their lives and the thousands of others that fell before them that we ask today's question: should the United States centralize Russian sanctions enforcement on secondary sanctions through third country banks? And the answer is a resounding yes, because this will help cut off Russia's ability to financial loopholes. First, by stopping them from pivoting to Asian oil exports. Second, by limiting their access to dual-use technology. And finally, by stopping them from exporting incomplete goods. Just recently, Putin, Chinese President Xi Jinping, and Indian leader Narendra Modi were all spotted at a summit together, hugging each other and even skipping down the hallways holding each other's hands. They look a lot like a bunch of teenage girls at a slumber party. Not that I would know personally, but nevertheless, the first reason why the United States needs to centralize its sanctions enforcement is to stop it from pivoting its oil exports. In fact, an article from the Harvard Business Review contextualizes last year that after the United States put heavy sanctions on our imports of Russian oil, Putin pivoted to exports towards other countries like China and India, doubling their exports of oil. So now, Russia has an additional $50 billion in oil trade with these two countries, which it's facilitating through their third country banks. But this is precisely how the United States can respond. In fact, an article from the Washington Post corroborates on September 2nd of this year, explaining that the way Russia is doing this is taking its main oil, the Ramnagar oil refinery, and is connected with the Chinese and Indian third country banks. If the United States puts secondary sanctions on these banks to stop the exports of Russian oil to these countries, it may be a step in the right direction of not only stopping Russia's attacks on Ukraine through hurting its economy, but especially at a time where Putin, Xi Jinping, and Modi are becoming closer and closer allies against the United States. This may be the only way we're able to separate their dangerous connection. But it's not just about goods like oil, but also goods that Russia is using to attack Ukraine. That's the second reason why the United States needs to centralize sanction enforcement, because it'll stop Russia's use of dual-use technology. Specifically, the Wall Street Journal defines on January 10th of 2025 dual-use technology being any kind of good that a country can use for both civilian and militaristic purposes. For Russia, this looks like goods such as drones, which is using for civilian purposes, but also against Ukraine in their major strikes beyond their borders. This way, Russia has constantly been able to barrage Ukraine with countless attacks, and the United States' primary sanctions have been unable to deter this. But fortunately, there is a solution. The National Public Radio tells us on August 28th of this year, through secondary sanctions, we can see that the $4 billion in investments that Putin is putting into third country banks to invest in dual-use technologies, we could end immediately. They're putting this money to get access to more dual-use technology, but also invest in better ones. So by sanctioning the banks that are facilitating these investments, we can not only stop their access to this technology, but especially when Reuters reports just 13 hours ago that Russia launched a strike on Ukraine with over 800 drones. If there's any action we can take to stop these horrific attacks, then it's action we must take. And the third and final reason why the United States desperately needs to centralize its secondary sanctions is because it can stop Russia's loophole of incomplete materials. In fact, this is very nuanced. The New York Times explains in their article on February 14th of 2025, explaining that while there are sanctions on Russia for their fully completed goods, European companies, or rather countries like Belgium, Italy, and more, are importing half-finished metal goods from Russia, ones that don't have sanctions on them. So through Belgium and Italy's banks, they're able to finance trade equivalent to 4 million tons of these half-finished metal goods from Russia, keeping Russia's economy afloat and safe. And that is exactly why the United States needs to strike by centralizing our sanctions enforcements. The World Economic Forum tells us now on June 6th of this year, if we centralize our sanctions enforcements to attack the Belgium and Italian third country banks that are facilitating these imports of half-finished goods, we can not only stop Russia's exports of fully finished goods, but also the loopholes they're using to get around that as well. This won't just attack a $10 billion industry for Russia, hurting their economy, but for the people of Ukraine. By taking more action against Russia, this could be a bright light of hope for them and a signal of an end of a war. So upon returning back to today's question, should the United States centralize its sanctions on Russia enforcements through secondary sanctions on third country banks? The answer clearly is yes, because it may help reduce Russia's financial loopholes, whether that's through oil, dual-use technology, or half-completed goods. While Putin's approach to poop suitcases is definitely a stinky foreign policy approach, it's clear that the United States needs to step up its foreign policy approach as well. And if we're able to do that from secondary sanctions, that is action that is necessary for us to take. Thank you so much. And